What if the law you've spent your entire life defending is the very system that betrays you? Eleanor Lawson, a retired legal titan, had always believed in the justice system. For decades, she fought for what was right, never doubting the integrity of the law. But when a baseless lawsuit lands at her door, accusing her of crimes she never committed, she's forced to confront a chilling reality. The system she once trusted has turned against her. With a lifetime of legal expertise behind her, Eleanor knows the stakes are higher than just defending her name. This isn't just a fight for her reputation. It's a battle against the very corruption she spent years exposing. Eleanor Lawson had never imagined she'd find herself in this position. She had built her career around upholding the law, defending the vulnerable, and fighting the dark forces that lurked within the legal system. Now, at 72, she had finally stepped away from the courtroom, ready for a peaceful retirement. It had been 5 years since she left her post as the city's chief zoning attorney, and Eleanor had spent that time enjoying the quiet solitude of her home. The papers that piled up on her desk, mostly filled with old case files and memories of her long, storied career, were no longer a source of stress but reminders of a life well lived. But on one ordinary evening, everything changed. A sharp knock on her door broke the silence. It was a courier delivering a package. At first glance, it seemed like a typical legal document. But as Eleanor opened it, her face fell. Inside was a lawsuit, an accusation of fraud and corruption filed against her. The charges were absurd. The plaintiff claimed that Eleanor had manipulated zoning laws during her time in office for personal gain. It was a well-crafted lie, and for a moment, Eleanor simply stared at the paper in disbelief. This wasn't just a personal attack. It was an orchestrated attempt to ruin her reputation. Someone wanted to erase the legacy of the woman who had spent her career ensuring fairness in the legal system. But who would go to such lengths? And why? As the initial shock wore off, Eleanor's mind kicked into high gear. She had spent years analyzing legal documents, cross-examining witnesses, and building airtight cases. She wasn't someone who could be easily intimidated. Yet, this felt different. This wasn't just an attack on her career. It was a direct strike at the heart of the legal world she had spent her life protecting. Her eyes narrowed as she realized something crucial. The case was a setup, and whoever was behind it had powerful resources. Eleanor knew immediately that this was no random lawsuit. This was a challenge she could not ignore. Eleanor's return to the courtroom was inevitable. But she was no longer the young, fiery attorney she once was. Time had softened her, but her mind was sharper than ever. She might have stepped away from public life, but her passion for justice remained unyielding. She walked into the courtroom the next morning, a place she hadn't stepped foot in for years. As she stood before the judge, she couldn't help but notice the disbelieving looks from the younger attorneys and even the prosecutor, a man named Nathan Grant, who seemed more interested in his phone than in the proceedings. Eleanor knew exactly what they were thinking. Why was this woman, who should be enjoying her retirement, back here? The judge, Raymond Carter, a man she had known professionally for years, was quick to show his dismissive attitude. Carter had always been known for his arrogant demeanor, often making snap judgments without considering all the facts. His reputation as a no-nonsense judge worked well for him in most cases, but Eleanor could see through the facade. She could tell he was already making assumptions about her abilities. "Ms. Lawson," he began, without even looking up from his notes. "I trust you understand the gravity of the accusations against you. We're here to determine if you have broken the law, and I suggest you make your defense brief." Eleanor smiled, a slight smirk playing on her lips. So this is how it's going to be, she thought. They all underestimated her. "I'm fully aware of the gravity, Your Honor," she replied calmly, her voice carrying an air of confidence that made even the most hardened individuals pause. "But I assure you, this case is not what it appears. The truth will come out, and I will prove it." The courtroom went silent for a moment, as if her words had hit a nerve. Even Judge Carter looked up at her, raising an eyebrow. Eleanor could see the seeds of doubt in his eyes, but he quickly masked it with a scoff. The prosecutor, Nathan Grant, wasted no time launching into his case. His arguments were shaky at best, built on nothing more than hearsay and fabricated documents. But Eleanor didn't flinch. She listened carefully, taking notes in her mind. The more he spoke, the more it became clear. There was nothing substantial to this case. Everything he presented was based on manipulated evidence. When it was her turn to speak, Eleanor stood tall. She didn't rush into the defense. Instead, she carefully dismantled each accusation one by one, presenting the facts with the precision of a surgeon. As she tore apart the prosecution's case, the judge's face began to shift from condescension to subtle recognition. This wasn't just a retiree trying to make a comeback. This was a seasoned attorney who had outsmarted and outwitted countless opponents in her time. "You're suggesting that I've committed fraud. But where is your proof?" Eleanor asked, her tone calm but firm. "You can't just throw accusations around without facts. What you have here are assumptions, and they don't stand in a court of law." As the prosecution scrambled to answer, Eleanor's voice cut through the air once more. "I may have left the courtroom years ago, but the law hasn't changed. I know how it works, better than anyone here. You've underestimated me, and that will be your downfall." Eleanor's confidence only grew as the trial continued. Each argument she presented was a reminder to everyone in the room that she was not someone to be taken lightly. She wasn't just defending herself. She was fighting for something much larger than her own name. The corruption that ran through the legal system, hidden behind powerful figures who thought they were untouchable, had to be exposed, and Eleanor Lawson was the one who would expose it. The next few days were filled with fierce exchanges in the courtroom. Eleanor was relentless, turning every attack back on the prosecution with such skill that even Judge Carter couldn't help but notice. His skepticism had given way to respect, and by the end of the week, it was clear that Eleanor had the upper hand. But she knew this was only the beginning. The deeper she dug into the lawsuit, the more she realized this was part of a larger plan, one that involved corruption at the highest levels. Someone powerful had orchestrated this case, and they would stop at nothing to see her brought down. Eleanor Lawson had come out of retirement not just for herself, but for the integrity of the legal system. She had spent years dismantling corruption from the inside, and now she was determined to take down those who thought they could manipulate the law for their own gain. The road ahead was dangerous, but Eleanor had never been afraid of a fight. As the court recessed, she gathered her things, her mind already racing. She had one goal now: to expose the truth, no matter the cost. And the real battle had only just begun. Eleanor Lawson was no stranger to tension. After decades in the legal world, she learned to anticipate the twists and turns that often came with high-stakes cases. But nothing had prepared her for the storm brewing in the wake of her courtroom victory. Her opponent had underestimated her, and now, it seemed, the real fight was just beginning. The courthouse doors had barely closed behind her when Eleanor felt the weight of the situation settle over her. That afternoon, she'd successfully defended herself against a baseless lawsuit, using her sharp wit and deep knowledge of the law to turn the tide. But as the applause for her victory faded, Eleanor's mind couldn't shake the unsettling thought. This wasn't just a random case. Someone wanted to ruin her. But why? Eleanor stood in front of her office window that evening, staring out into the city below. Baton Rouge, with its quiet streets and looming shadows, seemed so peaceful. Yet beneath that calm exterior, Eleanor knew that powerful forces were stirring. Forces that had been in the background for far longer than anyone realized. Her instincts told her that the lawsuit was just a smokescreen, a distraction from something much larger at play. She needed answers, and she needed them fast. The phone call came at midnight. "Eleanor," Daniel's voice crackled through the line. "I found something. You need to see this." She didn't waste a second. "I'm on my way." By the time Eleanor arrived at the office, Daniel had already gathered the information he'd uncovered. He was hunched over a stack of legal documents, his face pale. "It's worse than we thought," he said, pushing the papers toward her. Eleanor scanned the documents quickly, her eyes narrowing as she absorbed the details. The plaintiff who had brought the lawsuit against her wasn't just some random individual. He had ties to a network of high-profile individuals, people with the means and motivation to ruin her reputation. And that network, Eleanor realized, led back to one name: James Calloway. The name struck Eleanor like a punch to the gut. She had helped expose Calloway years ago, when he had been a district attorney known for bending the law to suit his needs. She had been instrumental in bringing his corruption to light, and in the process, had destroyed his career. But Eleanor never imagined that Calloway's influence could reach this far. She had thought him gone, disgraced, forgotten. Clearly, she had been wrong. Calloway's back, Eleanor muttered to herself. And this time, he's coming for me. Do you think he's behind this lawsuit? Daniel asked, his voice trembling with concern. I don't think. I know, Eleanor replied, her voice cold with resolve. Calloway isn't just trying to destroy me personally. This is about something much bigger. He's rebuilding his empire, and he wants to take down anyone who stands in his way, me included. Daniel's hands shook as he flipped through the pages. There's more. I dug deeper into the plaintiff's connections. There's a network behind him, a web of corrupt individuals who seem to be connected to Calloway, and now, it's all pointing back to a secret bank known as the Haven Trust. Eleanor froze. The Haven Trust, she repeated slowly. She had heard rumors of a private banking system that had long been suspected of laundering money for high-level politicians, corrupt officials, and businessmen. But she never imagined it would be connected to Calloway. And yet, as she looked at the evidence laid out before her, everything began to click into place. If Calloway is involved with the Haven Trust, she said, her mind racing, then this isn't just a personal vendetta. This is part of a larger scheme, one that involves powerful people trying to manipulate the system for their own gain. And they're using me as their pawn. The next few days were a blur. Eleanor and Daniel worked tirelessly, digging deeper into the shadowy dealings of Calloway and the complex network that supported him. They tracked down financial records, scoured public documents, and even spoke to a few trusted sources who had long since disappeared from the legal world. Every lead seemed to confirm their worst fears. Calloway had been building a new network, and his reach extended far beyond what Eleanor could have ever imagined. One night, as Eleanor pored over a stack of encrypted files, her phone buzzed with an incoming message. It was from an anonymous source. The message read, Calloway has been using the Haven Trust to funnel money for years. He's always been one step ahead, but you've got the advantage now. Get him before he gets you. Eleanor's mind raced. She had always been one to fight back against the system's injustices, but this was different. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for the future of the legal system itself. Calloway's corruption could destroy everything she had worked for, everything she believed in. If she didn't stop him now, the damage could be irreversible. She called Daniel immediately. I need everything you've got on the Haven Trust. Every document, every transaction, every name. We're going after Calloway. By the time they pieced together the full scope of the conspiracy, Eleanor had a plan. The next step was simple, but dangerous. They had to expose Calloway and his network to the public. The only way to take down a man like him was to reveal his darkest secrets, and in doing so, reveal the entire system of corruption that had protected him for so long. Eleanor knew it wouldn't be easy. Calloway had powerful allies, politicians, business magnates, even law enforcement officers, who would stop at nothing to keep him safe. But Eleanor wasn't afraid. She had taken down dangerous men before, and she would do it again. As she prepared for the battle ahead, Eleanor couldn't help but feel the weight of the stakes. This wasn't just about clearing her name anymore. It was about justice, not just for her, but for everyone who had ever been wronged by the system. Eleanor Lawson had returned to the courtroom to reclaim what was hers, but she wasn't going to stop there. She was going to expose the truth, no matter the cost. And with every step she took, the enemy grew closer. But so did her resolve. The real battle was about to begin. Eleanor Lawson hadn't spent a lifetime in the courtroom to sit idly by when a corrupt former district attorney was out to destroy everything she held dear. James Calloway was more than just a man with power and a corrupted past. He was a symbol of everything Eleanor had fought against in her storied career: deceit, manipulation, and the abuse of power. She knew that to bring him down, she had to get ahead of him, stay one step ahead in a game where the stakes were higher than ever. Her office felt smaller now, crowded with stacks of legal documents, bank statements, and encrypted files. The weight of the situation pressed down on her. Eleanor had always prided herself on her composure, her ability to outsmart her opponents with quiet precision. But this time, the stakes were more personal. Calloway wasn't just going after her career. He was aiming at everything she'd built, everything she'd fought for. And worse, he was using a tangled web of power, money, and corruption to accomplish it. She had to fight fire with fire. The first breakthrough came when she began to dig deeper into the mysterious Haven Trust, the shadowy organization that had helped fund Calloway's return to power. What started as a petty legal skirmish had quickly evolved into something far more insidious. It wasn't just about money, it was about control. Eleanor discovered the trail of corrupt dealings led far beyond Calloway's reach. He had created a vast network of influencers, politicians, law enforcement officials, businessmen, all bound by their shared interest in maintaining their positions of power. The more she uncovered, the more Eleanor realized how deeply entrenched Calloway's influence had become. The documents were damning. Eleanor could almost hear the ticking of the clock in the back of her mind, knowing that every second she wasted could be another step toward losing everything. She had to act fast. But even with this new evidence, Eleanor wasn't sure where to turn. Calloway had ties to powerful people, people who could make her life a nightmare if they wanted to. She wasn't naive. She understood that any attempt to expose him would put her and her allies at risk. The legal system had always been a battleground for truth, but this was a war. It wasn't until she received a cryptic message from Daniel that the pieces began to fall into place. "I found something, Eleanor. This is bigger than we thought." The text left her heart racing. She had no time to lose. She immediately called Daniel, and within hours, she was at his office, her mind focused on the task ahead. The files she had were heavy with the weight of their contents, but this new information could be the key. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of a single desk lamp. Daniel sat at his desk, looking more exhausted than she had ever seen him. "Here," he said, sliding a file across the table. "This is what Calloway's been hiding. His entire operation is a house of cards built on corruption." Eleanor opened the file, scanning the documents quickly. It wasn't just the Haven Trust. There were bank transfers, covert meetings with political figures, and connections to organized crime. This wasn't a simple case of a disgraced former attorney looking for redemption. This was a man who had weaponized the legal system itself. The corruption ran deep, deeper than she had realized. Her fingers trembled as she read through the evidence. There, hidden between the lines, was proof of a conspiracy involving Senator Richard Hale, a powerful political figure whose name had been linked to numerous shady deals. The very same senator who had been a constant thorn in Eleanor's side throughout her career. If anyone had the power to stop her, it was Hale. And yet here it was, his fingerprints all over the same illegal dealings that Calloway had been orchestrating. "I'm sending this to the press," Eleanor said, her voice quiet but firm. "This can't wait any longer." But Daniel didn't look convinced. "Are you sure? This is dangerous. Calloway will come after us. People like him don't let things slip away easily." Eleanor closed the file and locked eyes with him. "I'm not going to let him destroy everything I've built. The law is supposed to serve justice, not power. It's time to expose him for who he really is." She stood, already pulling on her coat. Daniel hesitated, but eventually followed suit. Together, they'd set a plan in motion. But as Eleanor took the first steps to bring Calloway to justice, she knew this was only the beginning. They had to move quickly. The longer they waited, the harder it would be to escape the tightening noose around them. Eleanor and Daniel worked through the night, putting the final touches on the exposé that would reveal everything Calloway and his network had been hiding. The moment they pressed send, they knew the story would break wide open. The legal world, the political world, even the media. It was all about to be shaken to its core. The morning came with the sound of her phone buzzing incessantly. Headlines, alerts, social media threads filled with her name. The world was awake, and they were watching. But it wasn't the press that Eleanor was worried about. It was Calloway's next move. His influence ran too deep, and Eleanor had learned long ago that when you make a powerful enemy, you never knew just how far they would go to protect themselves. That afternoon, as she sat in her office, her door slammed open. She turned, surprised to see Judge Raymond Carter standing there, his face drawn with concern. He was one of the last people she expected to show up. After all, he had been part of the system that nearly crushed her. "What are you doing here?" Eleanor demanded. "I came to warn you," Judge Carter said, his voice tight. "Calloway's going to come after you now. He won't stop, not until he's destroyed everything." Eleanor stood up, her hands resting on the desk. She wasn't sure what to make of Carter's sudden shift in attitude. He had once been part of the system that had undermined her. But the urgency in his eyes told her something had changed. "I'm not running anymore," she said, her tone unwavering. "This ends now. Whatever he throws at me, I'll fight back, and I'll bring him down." "I'm with you," Carter said, his voice low but resolute. "I've seen what he's capable of. We need to bring him down together, before it's too late." Eleanor stared at him for a long moment, weighing her options. Was this truly an alliance she could trust? "All right," she finally said, nodding. "But this isn't just about me anymore. We're going to take down the whole network. If we fail, everything we've fought for will be gone." And just like that, the lines were drawn. Eleanor's fight for justice had grown bigger than herself. The war was no longer just about her. It was about everything the law stood for. The pieces were falling into place. And this time, Eleanor Lawson would make sure that justice wasn't just done. It was delivered with a vengeance. Eleanor Lawson had spent a lifetime fighting against the odds, but nothing could prepare her for what she was about to face. The battle for justice had shifted into a high-stakes game where every move, every word, could tip the balance in a system corrupted from the inside out. Calloway's empire wasn't just built on money. It was built on fear, on influence, and on people who were willing to protect him at any cost. With Judge Carter's sudden support, Eleanor found herself less alone in this fight, but the danger only escalated. She knew the walls were closing in, and Calloway's next move could be catastrophic. Still, Eleanor wasn't backing down. Not now, not ever. She sat across from Daniel in her office, the room still and silent except for the sound of their breathing. The evidence they had sent out to the press had sparked a frenzy, but it had also painted a target on their backs. Eleanor's phone buzzed on the table, breaking the silence. "Do you think they'll do it?" Daniel asked, his voice carrying the uncertainty they both felt. "Will Calloway go after us?" Eleanor didn't need to look at her phone to know what was coming. "He already has." She picked up the phone, seeing the flood of messages from colleagues, friends, and even journalists asking about the bombshell they had dropped earlier. But there was one that caught her eye, a message from a source she didn't expect. "They know you're coming. You're in danger. Watch your back. They're closing in." Her heart skipped a beat. It was as if the whole world had just shifted beneath her feet. "What is it?" Daniel asked, watching her face as she read the message. "It's from someone on the inside," Eleanor said, her voice a mixture of caution and determination. "Someone who knows exactly what's happening behind the scenes. They're saying Calloway knows we're closing in on him, and they're not going to let us take him down without a fight." Daniel looked concerned but held Eleanor's gaze. "So, what now? We've already exposed him. We can't back out now." "I know," Eleanor said, standing up. Her mind was already racing through the next steps, piecing together a strategy as she walked toward the window, gazing out over the city below. "We have to act fast, before they have a chance to silence us. Calloway has people everywhere. This might be our last chance to hit him where it hurts." Her hand moved over the stack of files on her desk, each one containing evidence that could dismantle the network Calloway had carefully constructed. But they needed more evidence, more leverage, something that would force the system to take action, something that would tie Calloway directly to the biggest names in politics, law enforcement, and business. The Haven Trust had been a revelation, but Eleanor knew there was more to it. The shadowy figures pulling the strings from the shadows were still out there, and Calloway wouldn't hesitate to bury anyone who got in his way. "We need to take him down for good," Eleanor muttered, as much to herself as to Daniel. They both knew it wasn't just about the lawsuit anymore. It wasn't even about Eleanor's career or her past with Calloway. It was about something bigger. This was about restoring the integrity of the legal system, about exposing corruption at the highest levels, and about showing the world that the law could be used as a tool for justice, not manipulation. Later that evening, Eleanor and Daniel found themselves at a dimly lit cafe downtown, discussing their next move. The atmosphere was tense, the air thick with the weight of the decisions they were making. They had agreed to meet with an old contact, Terry Blake, a former investigative journalist who had spent years uncovering corruption in Baton Rouge's political scene. Terry had gone underground after publishing an exposé on illegal campaign donations from shady donors. The public fallout had been swift, and Terry had vanished into the shadows, just another casualty in the war for power. "Are you sure we can trust him?" Daniel asked, looking at Eleanor skeptically. "He's been off the radar for years. What if he's compromised?" Eleanor paused, then nodded. "Terry might have been forced into hiding, but he's still the best we've got. If anyone can help us connect the dots between Calloway and the politicians we need, it's him." As if on cue, Terry appeared at the table, his scruffy appearance belying the sharpness in his eyes. He wasted no time in sitting down, glancing around before speaking. "I'm assuming you're ready to get this over with?" Terry asked, his voice low and urgent. Eleanor didn't hesitate. "We're in. We need everything you know about the people backing Calloway. Senator Hale, his connections, any evidence you have on the Haven Trust. We can't afford to wait." Terry nodded. "I've got some things, but we need to be careful. Calloway's not the only one with eyes everywhere. You've made a lot of noise, and trust me, there are people who want you silenced." Eleanor's jaw tightened. "I'm not running. We've got one shot at this. Help us, and we'll make sure Calloway and his cronies are brought to justice." The tension in the room was palpable, but Terry seemed to understand. He slid a manila envelope across the table, filled with documents, bank records, and hidden communications that pointed directly to Calloway's inner circle. The connection between Calloway, Hale, and others became clear. It wasn't just a network. It was a cartel operating at the highest levels of government and law enforcement. "We move fast," Terry said, his voice grim. "Calloway's people will be coming for you, and soon. If they find out you've got this, we'll be ready," Eleanor assured him, her resolve stealing. "Calloway can hide in the shadows for now, but we're going to shine a light on every corner of his empire." Back at her office, Eleanor began preparing for the next phase of their strategy. This wasn't going to be just a courtroom battle anymore. It was going to be a fight for survival. The more they exposed, the more dangerous it became. And just when she thought things couldn't get more complicated, Eleanor received a call she never expected. It was James Calloway himself. "Eleanor," his voice slithered through the phone line. "I've heard about your little crusade, but let me remind you of something. I've spent my entire career in this game. You think you can take me down, but I'm untouchable." Eleanor's heart raced, but her tone remained calm, controlled. "We'll see about that, Calloway. Your empire is crumbling, and I'm the one who's going to bring it down." "You don't scare me," he hissed. "But just remember this, I always get the last word." The line went dead. Eleanor stood in the center of her office, staring at the phone in her hand. For the first time in this fight, she felt the true weight of what was at stake. But she wasn't backing down. The final confrontation was coming, and this time, there would be no mercy. The walls were closing in, and Eleanor Lawson knew this could be the moment that changed everything. With the evidence they had, she could bring Calloway down. But even now, the danger loomed like a dark cloud. Every decision from this point on could make the difference between exposing the truth and getting buried under it. Eleanor and Daniel had spent the last few days preparing for the final confrontation. They'd gone through the evidence, connected the dots, and built their case meticulously. But the truth was, nothing could fully prepare them for what they were about to face. The network they were up against was vast. Corrupt judges, politicians, and even law enforcement were tangled in this web. As Eleanor sat in her office late one evening, the weight of the task ahead seemed almost unbearable. She had already faced so much: professional slander, personal attacks, and even death threats. But nothing compared to what lay ahead. James Calloway wasn't just a corrupt former district attorney. He was a man willing to destroy anyone who threatened his empire, no matter the cost. Daniel knocked on the door, breaking her thoughts. He stepped inside, his face pale but determined. "The judge is ready," he said, holding up a file with the court documents. "Tomorrow's the day. It's all or nothing." Eleanor nodded without speaking. She had no illusions about what would happen in that courtroom. Judge Raymond Carter, the same man who had once dismissed her case with such disdain, would be presiding. But this time, Eleanor wasn't the one on trial. It was the entire system, the network of corruption that had protected Calloway for so long. "Let's go over the plan one more time," Eleanor said, her voice low but clear. Daniel leaned forward, spreading the papers out on the desk. We'll present the financial evidence first. The ties between Callaway, Hale, and the Haven Trust. We've got transaction records, offshore accounts, and enough proof to implicate everyone involved. But the tricky part is the Senate's involvement. Senator Hale is a powerful figure, and we'll need concrete evidence to break his immunity. Eleanor nodded, her expression hardening. We've got it. We'll connect the final dots tomorrow. But I need you to stay focused. This isn't just about winning a case. It's about sending a message. Callaway thinks he's untouchable, and Hale thinks he's above the law. It's time to show them they're wrong. The next morning, the courtroom was packed. The air was thick with tension. News cameras lined the walls, and reporters whispered among themselves, sensing that something monumental was about to unfold. In the gallery, there were familiar faces. Legal professionals, activists, and even a few government officials who had been keeping an eye on the trial. At the defense table, Eleanor sat poised as ever, her expression unreadable. Beside her, Daniel shuffled through his papers nervously. They had prepared for this moment, but the reality of facing down their enemies in front of a packed courtroom made even the most seasoned professionals uneasy. Across from them, James Callaway sat smugly, his legal team surrounding him like a fortress. The man exuded arrogance. He was the picture of confidence, thinking he could still control the room, thinking the truth could be buried. Judge Carter, who had once dismissed Eleanor's defense so easily, entered the courtroom. His stern face showed no emotion as he took his seat. It was clear he had no intention of playing favorites today, at least, not with his former colleagues' fates on the line. Eleanor stood up, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. The room fell silent as she addressed the judge, her voice calm and authoritative. Your Honor, I'm here today not just to defend myself, but to expose a system that has been operating in the shadows for too long. A system built on lies, corruption, and fear. And I'm here to ensure that the truth is finally heard. She paused, locking eyes with Callaway. For the first time, his confidence faltered, if only for a moment. Eleanor could see the crack in his facade, the realization that his empire was crumbling. The evidence we present today will prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that James Callaway is guilty of orchestrating a massive web of financial fraud, political manipulation, and systemic corruption. His actions have affected the lives of countless innocent people, and it's time to hold him accountable. The room buzzed with energy as Eleanor handed over the first batch of evidence: transaction records, bank statements, and offshore accounts. Each document was a piece of the puzzle, each one a nail in Callaway's coffin. The prosecution team shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They had thought they could sweep this under the rug, but now the rug had been pulled out from under them. But that's not all, Eleanor continued, her voice steady. We have something even bigger. We've traced the financial flow to the highest offices in this state, and we've uncovered the involvement of a man who has used his position to shield Callaway from the consequences of his crimes. Senator Richard Hale? Gasps erupted from the gallery. Senator Hale was a well-known figure, a respected politician with powerful connections. He had always managed to stay just out of reach of the law, his influence extending far beyond the courtroom. But now, with Eleanor's damning evidence, Hale's carefully constructed reputation was beginning to unravel. Senator Hale has protected Callaway, concealed his actions, and even used his influence to block investigations into his crimes, Eleanor said, her gaze sharp as she turned to the judge. We have proof of illegal campaign contributions, backroom deals, and financial ties to the Haven Trust. This is not just about one man's greed. It's about a network that has corrupted our entire legal system. The room was in chaos. The prosecution team scrambled to regroup, but it was clear they were outmatched. Callaway's once sturdy defense had collapsed, and Senator Hale's involvement had opened a door they couldn't close. But just as it seemed like victory was within reach, a sudden interruption shattered the tension. The doors to the courtroom swung open, and a group of armed men stormed in. They were dressed in tactical gear, their faces masked. Panic erupted, and the courtroom descended into chaos. Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest, but her mind remained sharp. She had seen intimidation before, but this was something new. These men weren't just thugs, they were professionals. "Everyone stay down," one of the intruders shouted. "This is a robbery. No one move." Eleanor's first thought was to protect the evidence. She knew if they lost the documents, they would lose everything. But she couldn't help but wonder, was this a final desperate attempt by Calloway's network to silence her? She didn't have time to think about it. She had a job to do. "Daniel, get the files," she whispered, urgency in her voice. "I'll handle this." As Daniel ducked down behind the defense table, Eleanor stood up slowly, her eyes scanning the room. The intruders hadn't accounted for her. Her years of experience in the courtroom had prepared her for moments like this. But she hadn't expected a fight like this to happen today. One of the intruders moved toward her, gun raised. Eleanor didn't hesitate. With a sudden move, she lunged forward, grabbing a chair and knocking it into the man's legs. He went down with a crash, and the gun slipped from his hand. The room erupted into chaos. People screamed, scrambled to find cover. But Eleanor's mind was focused entirely on one thing: survival. Suddenly, there was a loud bang. The gunfire echoed through the courtroom. "Get down!" Daniel screamed, pulling her to the ground. For a moment, the world stood still. The truth was close. But now, Eleanor wasn't just fighting for justice. She was fighting for her life. The dust had barely settled in the courthouse when the full weight of what had just transpired began to hit. Eleanor Lawson stood in the shadow of the building, her breath steadying as she watched the police move in, securing the area. The masked men who had stormed the courtroom had been apprehended, but they were just pawns in a much larger game. Their attack, though violent and terrifying, hadn't been enough to stop the truth from coming to light. Eleanor's mind raced. The evidence they'd recovered, the financial records, the recordings, the paper trail that led straight to James Calloway and Senator Hale, was irrefutable. It wasn't just about Calloway anymore. It was about the corrupt system that had allowed men like him to thrive, unchecked, for far too long. Her phone buzzed. She checked it quickly and saw a message from Daniel. "The press is outside. The story is already breaking. They're talking about the corruption, the connections to Hale, everything. This is it. We've got them." For a moment, she allowed herself to feel the weight of what they had just accomplished. This was the moment she had dreamed of during all her years in the legal field. The moment when justice was finally served. But it wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. Back at her office, Eleanor sat in the silence, going through the final pieces of evidence. She was alone, save for Daniel, who was working on organizing the press conference that would follow. The exposure of Calloway's ties to corrupt officials, including the shadowy network behind the Haven Trust, had sent shockwaves through the city. The media was already running with the story, but Eleanor knew the real battle was just beginning. It would take more than headlines to dismantle the corruption at the heart of the system. Her door creaked open, and Daniel entered, holding a folder in his hands. "Eleanor," he said, his voice cautious, "I think we need to talk about what's next." She glanced up from the documents she was reviewing. "What do you mean?" Daniel handed her the folder. "It's about Senator Hale. We've got more intel. This goes higher than we thought. Much higher." Eleanor opened the folder, her heart pounding as she scanned the new documents. It was a list of high-ranking officials, business leaders, and even judges who were involved with the corrupt network. The web was far more extensive than she had ever imagined. Hale's influence reached all the way to the state capitol and beyond. "I knew it was big, but this is massive," Eleanor muttered, her voice low. "If we bring Hale down, we take down the whole network. But it's going to take careful maneuvering. We can't just go after him head-on." Daniel nodded. "I know, but I think we have enough leverage now. Calloway's arrested, and with Hale's involvement exposed, we have the upper hand." Eleanor leaned back in her chair, her mind calculating the next move. The pieces were in place, but it wouldn't be easy. There was still a lot of work to do, and Hale was not going to go down without a fight. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Eleanor worked tirelessly, coordinating with investigators, legal teams, and the press. The pressure mounted with each passing day as they uncovered more evidence of the corruption that had poisoned the city's political and legal systems. Calloway, once a powerful figure, was now a prisoner, but he still had friends in high places who were trying to protect him. And Hale, despite the growing public outcry, seemed untouchable. But Eleanor was relentless. She knew that justice couldn't be served without a fight, and she had fought too hard for this moment to let it slip away. The final confrontation came unexpectedly. After weeks of building their case, Eleanor and her team had finally gathered enough to take down Hale. But it wasn't going to be a courtroom battle. No, this time, Eleanor would make sure the truth reached the public in a way that would leave no room for denial. It happened during a press conference, one that had been planned to address the ongoing corruption investigation. Hale, still clinging to his political power, had agreed to attend, convinced that the media attention would play in his favor. But Eleanor had a different plan. The conference began as usual, with reporters asking questions about the ongoing investigation into Calloway's ties to corrupt officials. But then, just as the press was beginning to get restless, Eleanor stood up, her eyes cold and unwavering as she addressed the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying authority, "I know you've all been waiting for answers, and today, I'm here to give them to you." She clicked a button on her phone, and the screen behind her came to life. It was a video of Senator Hale meeting with Calloway and other powerful figures, discussing illegal dealings, bribes, and plans to sabotage political opponents. It was undeniable evidence, damning and irrefutable. The room fell into stunned silence. Hale's face went pale as the video played, his smug smile evaporating in an instant. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Eleanor didn't give him the chance to defend himself. She continued, her words cutting through the air like a blade. "This is the man who has been pulling the strings in our state for years. This is the man who has used his power to silence the voices of the people, to control the legal system, and to destroy anyone who dared to stand in his way. But today, we're not just exposing him. We're exposing the entire network that's been operating in the shadows, thinking they were untouchable." The media erupted into chaos as reporters rushed to get more details, cameras flashing, questions shouted from every angle. But Eleanor stood firm, her calm demeanor unshaken as she turned to face the room full of reporters, each one eager for more. "The truth is out now. The system is broken, but we have the power to fix it. Together, we can make sure that no one, no matter how powerful, is above the law." The aftermath was swift. Senator Hale was arrested within hours, and his allies quickly followed. The scandal shook the state to its core. The corruption that had seeped into the highest echelons of power was finally exposed, and the public demanded change. Legal reforms were swiftly introduced, and a new era of transparency and accountability began to take shape. As for Eleanor Lawson, she had achieved what she set out to do. The battle had been long and hard, but justice had prevailed. She had returned to the legal arena not just to reclaim her past, but to ensure a better future. And in the end, it wasn't just about the cases she won or the people she brought down. It was about leaving a legacy of integrity, resilience, and the unshakable belief that justice, no matter how delayed, would always find its way. Eleanor stood on the steps of the courthouse one final time, the weight of the journey behind her, but her heart light. The fight for justice had been won, and she had played a part in ensuring it would be fought for years to come. And as the sun set behind her, Eleanor Lawson knew one thing for certain. The law was more than just a job, it was a call to action. And she had answered it.